They called Earth a soft garden world, and its people fragile. So, when the Vanguard instructor dialed the gravity room to a lethal level to wash out the only human recruit, he expected broken bones. Instead, he got a shattered floor and a terrifying realization about human muscle density. The Vanguard Coalition Academy orbited a pale blue gas giant in the Epsilon Eridani sector, a sprawling metallic fortress that represented the pinnacle of galactic military might. For Nicholas Garrison, it felt less like a fortress and more like a very expensive, very frustrating bouncy castle. Nicholas was a structural engineer by trade, a man who had spent the last decade of his life working on heavy-load launch pads for SpaceX and military-grade orbital tethers for Lockheed Martin. He was accustomed to the brutal, unforgiving pull of Earth's gravity, a force that demanded respect and forged bodies of dense bone and tightly coiled muscle. He was a large man, standing 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the expectations suddenly thrust upon him. As the very first human admitted to the Coalition's elite Vanguard program, Nicholas was supposed to be Earth's shining ambassador. Instead, he was currently known as the clumsiest recruit in Sector 4. The problem wasn't a lack of discipline, nor was it a lack of intelligence. The problem was the galactic standard. The interstellar community, comprising dozens of sentient species, had evolved predominantly on smaller, less dense planets. The average gravity across the Coalition's habitable worlds hovered around 0, 45 G, less than half of what a human experienced on Earth. To accommodate the majority, the Academy's artificial gravity plating was universally set to a breezy 0.5 G. For Nicholas, walking down the pristine, white-paneled corridors of the Academy was an exercise in extreme restraint. Every step required conscious calculation. If he pushed off the floor with his normal walking gait, he would inadvertently launch himself 2 feet into the air, his head narrowly missing the overhead lighting fixtures. If he reached for a data pad, his hand would shoot past it, his muscles overcompensating for resistance that simply wasn't there. "You are drifting again, Recruit Garrison," a voice barked, sharp and entirely devoid of warmth. Nicholas sighed, stabilizing himself by grabbing a reinforced handrail. He turned to face Commander Dallas. Thanks to the Coalition's standard-issue neural translation matrix, all alien names, idioms, and cultural concepts were automatically localized into the user's native cognitive framework. To the reptilian, towering alien standing before him, his name was likely a sequence of clicking consonants and low rumbles. To Nicholas's brain, the translator supplied the name Dallas, alongside an overwhelming impression of strict, uncompromising military authority. Commander Dallas belonged to a species known for their height and agility. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with a slender, whipcord physique and slate-gray skin, Dallas looked down at Nicholas with a mixture of disdain and genuine bewilderment. "My apologies, Commander," Nicholas said, carefully controlling his vocal cords to keep his voice even. "The deck plating friction here is a bit lower than I am accustomed to." "Do not blame the architecture for your lack of coordination, human," Dallas sneered, crossing his forearms over his narrow chest. "The Coalition accepted Earth into its ranks out of a misplaced sense of charity. Your world was classified by the Survey Corps as a class, 2 Garden World, a paradise of soft breezes and abundant resources. It is no wonder your physiology is so wildly unsuited for the rigors of the Vanguard." Nicholas bit the inside of his cheek. The Class 2 Garden World classification was a massive bureaucratic error. The galactic survey drone that had scanned Earth 50 years ago had malfunctioned in the upper atmosphere, reading the planet's abundant liquid water and green vegetation while entirely failing to measure its intense gravitational pull, its violent tectonic activity, or its hyper-competitive predatory biosphere. Earth wasn't a garden, it was a beautiful high-pressure crucible. But human diplomats, eager to secure trade routes and technological exchange with the broader galaxy, had quietly swept the error under the rug, not wanting to seem belligerent or intimidating. "I am adapting, sir," Nicholas said simply. "Adaptation requires a foundation of strength," Dallas replied, his localized voice dripping with condescension. "You weigh practically nothing, Garrison. Your movements are erratic. You lack the grace of the Centaurians and the natural armor of the Draconis. Tomorrow begins the kinetic trials. I suggest you find your footing, or I will personally see to it that you are sent back to your soft, green little world before the week is out." As Dallas turned and strode down the corridor with long, elegant strides, Nicholas let out a long breath. He rubbed his temples, feeling the dull ache of a mild tension headache. He missed the feeling of weight. He missed the sensation of his boots planting firmly into the dirt. "He's riding you hard, Nate." Nicholas turned to see Dr. Amelia Croft approaching. Amelia was the only other human on the station, serving as the chief medical officer for the human delegation and Nicholas's personal physician. She was a brilliant biophysicist who had formerly worked alongside Boeing's medical research division. "He thinks I'm fragile," Nicholas said, offering a tight, frustrated smile. "I spent 4 years hauling industrial shock absorbers in the Mojave Desert, Amelia. Now I have to pretend I'm struggling to lift a 20-pound training rifle just so I don't accidentally throw it through the hull of the station." Amelia pulled out her medical scanner, running a quick diagnostic over Nicholas's chest. "I know it's frustrating, but you have to maintain the deception for now." The diplomatic corps was very clear. If the coalition realizes that humans are basically high-density, high-gravity shock troops, it could trigger a massive security panic. They already view us as primitive upstarts. If they realize you could bench press Commander Dallas with one arm, they might reconsider our alliance entirely out of fear. "So I just keep playing the clumsy fool?" Nicholas asked, looking at his large, calloused hands. "You keep playing the adaptable underdog," Amelia corrected gently. "Your bone density is holding steady, but your fast-twitch muscle fibers are beginning to atrophy from the lack of resistance. I've scheduled you for some high-tension isometric resistance therapy tonight, but tomorrow." She paused, looking at the schedule on her datapad. "Tomorrow is the Crusher Room." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "The what?" "The High-G environmental simulator," Amelia explained, her tone turning serious. "It's the ultimate washout test for Vanguard recruits. Commander Dallas uses it to simulate the gravitational pull of class, 4 heavy worlds. He cranks the artificial gravity up to what the Coalition considers a lethal threshold to see who breaks." "How heavy?" Nicholas asked, suddenly interested. Amelia smirked, a glint of amusement in her eyes. "They push it all the way to 1.2G. Nicholas blinked. "Wait, 1.2, as in 20% more than Earth?" "Exactly," Amelia said. "To them, it's a crushing, impossible weight that shatters bones and ruptures organs. To you, it's going to feel like wearing a heavy backpack." Nicholas looked down the corridor where Dallas had disappeared, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in weeks. "Well, tomorrow should be interesting." The Vanguard Kinetic Training Arena was a massive, amphitheater-like space designed to test every facet of a recruit's physical prowess. The walls were lined with observation decks, currently filled with senior officers, tactical analysts, and medical staff. Down on the floor, 30 recruits from a dozen different species stood in formation. Nicholas stood near the back, his posture deliberately slouched to avoid towering over a squad of avian-descended recruits who looked like large, heavily armed ostriches. He was wearing the standard Vanguard tactical suit, a sleek, dark gray polymer blend that was supposed to enhance agility and provide kinetic shielding. To Nicholas, it felt like wearing a wetsuit made of tissue paper. Commander Dallas stood at the front of the formation, pacing back and forth. His gray skin seemed to catch the harsh overhead lighting, and his 4 eyes swept over the recruits with clinical detachment. "The Vanguard does not accept the weak." Dallas's voice boomed over the arena's localized audio system. "We are the first line of defense for the Coalition. We deploy to hostile environments, collapsed planetary colonies, and boarding actions on derelict freighters. We do not have the luxury of ideal conditions. Today, we will see if your bodies possess the structural integrity required to survive." The first phase of the assessment was the Agility Matrix. The recruits were required to navigate a shifting landscape of rising and falling pillars, leaping from one to the next while avoiding non-lethal stun drones. When it was Nicholas's turn, he took a deep breath, trying to mentally calculate the math. Force equals mass times acceleration. My mass is the same, but the gravitational pull here is halved. I need to apply exactly 40% of my normal leg strength, or I'm going to overshoot. He launched himself at the first pillar. He overcalculated. His boots barely grazed the edge of the first platform before he was sailing through the air, completely missing the second pillar and slamming awkwardly into the side of the third. He scrambled to find a handhold, his heavy boots sliding against the frictionless polymer surface. He managed to pull himself up, but his movements were jerky, hesitant, and entirely devoid of the natural rhythm he possessed back home. From the observation deck, he could hear the murmurs of the alien officers. To them, he looked like a lumbering, uncoordinated beast, struggling to master his own limbs. Pathetic, Dallas muttered loudly enough for the entire arena to hear. Look at the human. He stumbles over his own feet. A creature born of a soft world, completely overwhelmed by standard combat maneuvers. Nicholas gritted his teeth, finally reaching the end of the matrix and dropping to the floor. He hadn't broken a sweat, but the intense mental focus required to hold back his own strength was exhausting. Next was the kinetic gauntlet. Recruits had to strike a reinforced biometric pad to measure their raw physical output. The galactic standard for a Vanguard operative was roughly 400 kilojoules of kinetic force. A massive, armored recruit named Gideon, a member of a subterranean species known for their brute strength, stepped up to the pad. Gideon let out a localized roar and slammed his heavy, rock-like fist into the target. The screen flashed. 610 kilojoules. Exceptional. Dallas nodded in approval. That is the standard. Recruits. Raw, unyielding power. Nicholas stepped up to the pad. He looked at his fist. If he threw a proper Earth-style heavy cross, utilizing the kinetic chain from his dense leg bones, rotating his hips, and driving through his broad shoulders, he knew exactly what would happen. He had seen the structural blueprints for these biometric pads. They were rated for a maximum of 1,500 kilojoules. A full-strength punch from an angry, fully grown human male operating under Earth's evolutionary gravity could easily exceed that, potentially shattering the internal sensors. Amelia's warning echoed in his head. Keep playing the adaptable underdog. Nicholas awkwardly squared his shoulders, deliberately breaking his own form. He threw a flat, arm-only punch, entirely omitting his lower body from the movement. His fist connected with a dull thud. The screen flashed. 280 kilojoules. Below average. A collective sigh of disappointment rippled through the recruits. Gideon, the massive subterranean alien, scoffed openly. Commander Dallas walked slowly over to Nicholas, stopping mere inches from the human's face. I have seen enough, Garrison, Dallas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register. I read your file. An engineer, a builder of civilian infrastructure. You come from a world where the greatest threat to your survival is overconsumption of your abundant resources. You have no natural predators. You have no concept of hardship. Nicholas maintained eye contact, his jaw tight. With respect, Commander, you have never been to Earth. And I have no desire to visit a resort, Dallas snapped. The Vanguard is not a social club. It is a brotherhood forged in extreme conditions. Your physiology is fundamentally flawed. Your muscles are dense, yet they produce no force. Your frame is large, yet you cannot control it. You are a liability to the men and women who will serve beside you. Nicholas felt his blood temperature rising. It was one thing to play the diplomat. It was another to stand there and let this arrogant, hollow-boned alien insult his entire species. If my physiology is so flawed, Commander, then fail me, Nicholas challenged, his voice cold and steady. Wash me out right now. Dallas's four eyes narrowed, a predatory glint shining in his pupils. No, I will not give your diplomats the satisfaction of claiming I was biased. I will not fail you, Garrison. The environment will fail you. You will fail yourself. Dallas turned his back on Nicholas and addressed the rest of the recruits, his voice booming once more. The final assessment. Proceed to Chamber 4, the Apex trial. A heavy silence fell over the alien recruits. Even the massive Gideon seemed to stiffen. They all knew what Chamber 4 was. As they marched toward the reinforced blast doors at the far end of the arena, Gideon fell into step beside Nicholas. The large alien looked down at the human, his localized voice gruff but oddly sympathetic. You should withdraw, human, Gideon rumbled. There is no shame in acknowledging your biological limits. Chamber 4 is the Crusher. Dallas uses it to simulate the gravitational well of a dying star. It will crush your internal organs. I appreciate the concern, Gideon, Nicholas replied, adjusting the collar of his tactical suit. But I think I'll take my chances. Chamber 4 was unlike any other training facility on the station. It was a massive circular room, entirely devoid of obstacles or target pads. The floor was constructed of interlocking hexagonal tiles, a highly classified synthetic carbon weave material originally developed by the Coalition's premier military contractors to withstand orbital bombardments. It was perfectly smooth, pitch black, and theoretically indestructible. The walls were lined with heavy industrial-grade gravity generators, humming with a low, menacing frequency that vibrated against Nicholas's teeth. Above them, separated by a thick pane of transparent aluminum, was the primary observation deck. Nicholas could see Dr. Amelia Croft standing behind the glass, her arms crossed tight against her chest. Next to her stood a group of high-ranking Coalition generals, their expressions grim. Commander Dallas did not enter the chamber in his standard uniform. Instead, he stepped out of an airlock wearing a bulky, heavily mechanized exosuit. The suit hissed and whirred, pneumatic pistons locking into place around his slender alien legs and arms. Listen closely, recruits. Dallas's voice echoed through the external speakers of his exosuit. The universe does not care about your comfort. There are planets within our patrol sectors where the very atmosphere tries to crush you into the dirt. The Apex trial is a test of structural endurance and willpower. He tapped a sequence into the command console on his wrist. The heavy blast doors sealed shut behind them with a definitive airtight hiss. We begin at standard Coalition gravity, 0.5 G, Dallas announced. Nicholas stood comfortably, his hands resting loosely at his sides, increasing to 0.8 G. The hum of the generators deepened into a roar. Immediately, several of the avian recruits dropped to their knees, their fragile, hollow bones groaning under the sudden, massive increase in weight. Gideon grunted, planting his massive feet wider to stabilize his center of mass. Nicholas felt a sudden, familiar pressure pull at his shoulders. His boots felt like they were finally making proper contact with the floor. The constant, annoying sensation of floating began to fade. He took a deep breath, his lungs expanding comfortably. For the first time in 3 months, he didn't feel like a helium balloon on a string. Increasing to 1.0 G, the chamber groaned. 2 more recruits collapsed, pressing their hands against the carbon weave floor as they gasped for air. To them, the air itself had become heavy, turning their own bodies into prisons of unyielding lead. Gideon was sweating profusely, his massive chest heaving as he fought to remain standing. Even Commander Dallas's mechanized exosuit whined in protest, the servos struggling against the artificial pull. Nicholas blinked. 1.0, Earth Standard. He rolled his shoulders. The persistent ache in his lower back, a byproduct of his muscles constantly fighting the lack of resistance, instantly vanished. He cracked his neck, feeling a wave of genuine, profound relief wash over him. He felt grounded. He felt whole. He felt like himself. Observe the human, Dallas wheezed over the comms, clearly straining even inside his suit. See how he, Dallas trailed off. He turned his mechanized head, his 4 eyes widening behind his visor. Nicholas wasn't on his knees. He wasn't gasping. In fact, his posture had completely transformed. The awkward, slouching clumsiness was gone. He stood perfectly straight, a towering solid mass of bone and muscle perfectly attuned to the exact gravitational pressure of the room. He looked relaxed. Up in the observation deck, Dr. Croft covered her mouth to hide a massive grin. Impossible, Dallas muttered, checking his wrist console to ensure the gravity generators hadn't malfunctioned. Your skeletal structure. It should be microfracturing. I'm feeling fine, Commander, Nicholas said, his voice no longer tight with restraint. It was deep, resonant, and entirely unaffected by the pressure. Anger flashed across Dallas's face. He felt humiliated. In front of the senior staff, this soft-world engineer was making a mockery of the Vanguard's most brutal trial. We are not finished, Dallas snarled. He bypassed the safety protocols on his console, increasing to 1.2 G, lethal parameter simulation. The generators screamed, the sound vibrating violently through the chamber. The remaining recruits hit the floor instantly, completely immobilized. Gideon was pinned flat on his stomach, letting out a low, pained wheeze. The pressure hit Nicholas like a heavy, comforting, weighted blanket. It was heavy, yes. It felt like he was back in the Mojave Desert carrying a 60-pound rucksack. It required effort, but it was a familiar, welcomed effort. His heart pumped harder, flushing his system with oxygen. His dense, earth-evolved muscles tightened, locking his skeletal structure firmly into place. Gravity is set to 1.2, Commander, Nicholas said calmly, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. His heavy combat boot hit the floor with a solid, terrifying thud. What are your orders? Dallas took a step back, his exosuit whining loudly. He looked at the human not with disdain, but with sudden, dawning horror. You cannot move, Dallas stammered. The atmospheric pressure, the weight. I asked for your orders, sir, Nicholas barked, his voice echoing over the groaning machinery. He took another step. Thud! Dallas panicked. His authority was crumbling. He needed to prove the human was faking it, that adrenaline was merely masking a fatal internal injury. Execute a combat drop, Dallas ordered desperately. Standard Vanguard vertical leap and heavy landing. Do it, human. Your knees will shatter. Nicholas stopped. He looked at the floor, the billions of credits worth of synthetic, impenetrable carbon weave designed by alien engineers who had never conceived of a creature that naturally evolved under the crushing weight of Earth. Nicholas crouched. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he didn't hold back. He didn't calculate his mass. He didn't temper his strength. He let millions of years of mammalian evolution take over. His massive thigh muscles coiled tight, storing potential energy like a pair of industrial hydraulic presses. With a localized grunt of exertion, Nicholas launched himself upward. Despite the 1-2G gravity dragging him down, the sheer explosive force of his unrestrained muscles propelled his 240-pound frame a full 4 feet into the air. He hung there for a fraction of a second, a terrifying dense projectile of muscle and bone. Then, gravity took over, pulling him back down. Nicholas brought both boots together, locking his legs perfectly straight to drive all of his mass, multiplied by the acceleration of the heavy gravity, directly into a single, localized point on the floor. He struck the carbon weave tile. The sound was like a cannon firing inside a submarine. A deafening, concussive crack ripped through the chamber. Shockwaves rippled visibly across the synthetic floor. The impenetrable, mathematically perfect carbon weave tile directly beneath Nicholas's boots, spiderwebbed, caved inward, and violently shattered into 1,000 jagged black shards. The impact sent a seismic tremor through the room, tripping the gravity generator's internal fail-safes. The heavy hum of the machinery died instantly as the room violently snapped back to the standard 0. 5G. Alarms began to shriek, bathing the room in flashing red emergency lights. Nicholas stood slowly, dusting off his knees, standing amidst a crater of shattered, multi-million credit alien engineering. The rest of the recruits gasped as the pressure lifted, staring at the human in absolute, paralyzed terror. Commander Dallas's exosuit had locked up entirely, its servos blown by the seismic shock of the impact. He stared at the shattered floor, then slowly looked up at Nicholas. What are you? Dallas whispered, the translation matrix failing to mask the genuine fear in his voice. Nicholas offered a polite, professional smile, rolling his shoulders to work out a minor kink in his neck. Just a structural engineer from a garden world, sir, Nicholas replied. Though I think you might need to reconsider your flooring contractor. The silence in the observation deck was absolute, heavy enough to rival the gravity in the chamber below. The high-ranking coalition officers stared through the transparent aluminum, their multiple eyes unblinking, their breathing shallow. Down in the cratered ruin of Chamber 4, Nicholas Garrison stood entirely unbothered, while the Vanguard's most feared instructor remained frozen in a fried exosuit. Within 20 minutes, Nicholas was escorted not to the locker room, but to the station's secure holding annex. The debriefing room was stark, illuminated by harsh, sterile lighting. Dr. Amelia Croft stood at the center of the room, her datapad glowing, facing a tribunal of 3 Vanguard admirals. On the massive screen behind them, tactical software built on deep learning algorithms imported from Palantir Technologies, a human contribution to the Coalition's intelligence sharing, was endlessly looping the footage of Nicholas's jump. Red warning banners flashed across the screen, classifying the human's raw kinetic output as a class, one biological anomaly. You lied to us, Admiral Kalen, a feline-descended fleet commander, hissed through the translation matrix. Your diplomatic corps submitted biological profiles stating humans were standard mammalian bipeds. The kinetic energy required to shatter military-grade carbon weave is equivalent to a localized micro-missile strike. He is not a recruit. He is a walking siege weapon. We didn't lie, Admiral, Amelia replied, her voice steady and unapologetic. You simply failed to ask the right questions. Earth is a high-gravity, highly competitive world. Our evolution didn't have the luxury of hollow bones or fragile muscle tissue. Our ancestors hunted massive predators by quite literally running them to exhaustion. We are built for endurance, shock absorption, and brute force. Commander Dallas Rexford, having shed his ruined exosuit, sat in the corner of the room. He rubbed his face, his slate-gray skin pale. The translation matrix had localized his full honorific title to Rexford upon his promotion, a name meant to convey unyielding authority. Right now, he looked anything but authoritative. If that is true, Dallas Rexford said quietly, looking up, why did he perform so abysmally in the agility matrix? Why did he register a mere 280 kilojoules on the biometric pad? Because he was holding back, Commander, Amelia said, turning to him. Nicholas is an engineer. He understands structural tolerances. If he had punched your biometric pad with his full strength, he would have shattered the internal sensors. If he sprinted down your corridors, he would leave dents in your deck plating. He has spent the last 3 months terrified of accidentally hurting someone in a 0-5G environment. The admirals exchanged uneasy glances. The implication was staggering. The coalition had treated humanity like a charity case, a fragile species requiring protection. Now, they were realizing they had invited apex predators into their most sensitive military installations. Before Admiral Kalen could issue a formal ruling on Nicholas's status, a jarring mechanical screech echoed through the bulkhead walls. It was a sound that Nicholas, sitting quietly in his holding cell next door, instantly recognized. It was the sound of tearing metal. The sterile white lights of the debriefing room flickered, died, and were instantly replaced by the pulsing, blood-red strobe of the station's general quarters alarm. Report! Admiral Kalen barked into his comms unit. The frantic voice of the station's chief engineer flooded the channel. Admiral, it's Chamber 4! The synthetic carbon weave flooring wasn't just a training surface. It was the primary kinetic baffle for the station's zero-point energy manifold located on the deck below. The human's impact. It sent a seismic shockwave straight through the baffle. The manifold's containment field is microfracturing. Nicholas, having heard the comms through the thin walls of his cell, ripped the magnetic door off its track with a sharp, localized pull and stepped into the debriefing room. The admirals flinched, instinctively reaching for sidearms that weren't there. What does a manifold containment failure mean for this station? Nicholas demanded, his voice cutting through the panic with the sharp authority of a seasoned aerospace engineer. It means, Dallas Rexford said, standing up, his eyes wide with genuine terror, that the artificial gravity network is going to decouple, and then the lower hemisphere of this station is going to implode. The recruits, Amelia gasped, looking at the monitors. Gideon and the others. They are still in the staging area beneath Chamber 4. The bulkheads have automatically sealed to prevent atmospheric venting, the chief engineer reported over the comms. We can't open them remotely. The magnetic locks are engaged. They have less than 10 minutes before the manifold collapses and takes that entire sector with it. Admiral Kalen slammed his fist on the table. Scramble the heavy-duty maintenance drones. Get cutting lasers down there. No time, Nicholas said, his mind racing through the blueprints of the station he had studied for weeks. Your maintenance drones operate on frictionless treads. If the gravity network is decoupling, they won't have the traction to pull a heavy bulkhead open, and cutting lasers will take too long on blast doors rated for orbital debris. He looked at Dallas Rexford. Commander, I need you to authorize my access to the staging area. Garrison, what are you planning? Rexford asked, completely discarding his previous animosity. I spent years designing military-grade orbital tethers for Lockheed Martin, Nicholas said, cracking his knuckles. I know exactly how much shear force a magnetic locking pin can take before it snaps. And right now, I'm the only thing on this station with the mass and the muscle to apply that force. The corridors leading down to the lower hemisphere were a nightmare of fluctuating physics. As the zero-point energy manifold destabilized, the station's gravity generators began to fire randomly. One moment, Nicholas felt as light as a feather, forced to grab handholds to keep from floating away. The next, a crushing one. 5D slammed him into the deck plating, driving the breath from his lungs. He moved with ruthless efficiency. Stripped of his restrictive Vanguard tactical suit, he wore only his heavy-duty combat trousers and a tight, sweat-stained undershirt. Behind him, struggling to keep pace, was Commander Dallas Rexford. The alien instructor had insisted on coming, a matter of honor for abandoning his recruits, though he was visibly suffering under the gravitational spikes. They reached Sector 7, the staging area directly beneath the shattered Chamber 4. The main blast door, a massive slab of reinforced titanium alloy, was sealed shut. A thick, reinforced glass observation window was embedded in the door. Through the glass, Nicholas could see Gideon and a dozen other recruits. They were trapped in a rapidly deteriorating environment. Sparks rained down from the ceiling as the manifold beneath them began to whine with the ear-splitting pitch of impending critical failure. Gideon was pounding his massive, rocky fists against the door, but even his impressive subterranean strength was useless against magnetic locks designed to withstand the vacuum of space. "Stand back!" Nicholas roared, motioning for Gideon to move away from the door. "Garrison, it's magnetically sealed!" Rexford yelled over the screeching alarms. "It requires 80 tons of hydraulic pressure to pry open. Even your dense musculature cannot overcome a magnetic lock." "I don't need to overcome the magnet," Nicholas muttered, his eyes scanning the frame of the door. "I just need to break the physical housing it sits in." He approached the bulkhead. He closed his eyes for a split second, visualizing the schematics. A magnetic lock was only as strong as the metal anchoring it to the wall. If he could introduce enough torsional strain to the hinges, the housing would warp, misaligning the magnetic field and breaking the seal. It was the same principle used by heavy Caterpillar excavators. When tearing down reinforced concrete pillars, don't fight the strength of the material, fight its geometry. Nicholas wedged his thick, calloused fingers into the microseam between the blast door and the wall frame. The gap was barely wide enough for his knuckles, but he forced them in, the sharp metal biting into his skin and drawing blood. He planted his heavy boots squarely on the deck. The gravity in the corridor suddenly spiked to a localized one. 8G Rexford collapsed to his knees, gasping, completely pinned to the floor. Nicholas felt the crushing weight bearing down on his spine, trying to force him to the ground. But instead of yielding, he used it. He anchored himself, turning the intense gravitational pull into a solid foundation. His legs, built by millions of years of mammalian struggle on a harsh, unforgiving world, locked entirely into place. "Come on!" Nicholas growled, his voice a low primal rumble that vibrated through the corridor. He pulled. He didn't just use his arms. He used his entire kinetic chain. He engaged his massive latissimus dorsi, driving the force down through his core, into his hips, and down to the boots bolted to the floor by the heavy gravity. His muscles bulged, the thick veins in his neck and forearms standing out like steel cables. The titanium door groaned. Inside the staging area, Gideon and the alien recruits watched in absolute awe. To them, humans were small, hairless, soft creatures. But the man on the other side of the glass looked like a mythological titan, his face a mask of absolute, unyielding determination, pulling against a force that should have ripped his arms from their sockets. Kriak. The sound of warping metal echoed sharply. Nicholas adjusted his grip, ignoring the blood dripping from his hands. He took a sharp breath, his chest expanding, and gave one final explosive heave, twisting his torso to apply maximum rotational torque to the hinges. With a deafening snap that sounded like a gunshot, the titanium housing on the left side of the frame fractured. The sheer physical deformation misaligned the magnetic locking plates by a fraction of a millimeter. It was enough. The magnetic seal broke with a loud hiss. Nicholas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the edge of the heavy door and heaved it open on its ruined hinges, tossing the 10-ton slab of metal aside as if it were a wooden gate. "Move! Now!" Nicholas barked, grabbing Gideon by the shoulder and hauling the massive alien out of the staging area as the deck beneath them began to violently buckle. The recruits poured out into the corridor, stumbling and tripping in the fluctuating gravity. Nicholas stood by the doorway, physically catching those who fell and tossing them forward towards safety. He scooped up a severely disoriented avian recruit under one arm, while grabbing Commander Rexford by his uniform collar with his free hand, dragging the frozen instructor up the corridor just as the zero-point manifold in the staging area finally breached. A wave of concussive force blasted down the hallway, throwing them all forward. Nicholas shielded Rexford with his own body, his dense back absorbing the brunt of the kinetic shockwave and flying shrapnel. They tumbled through the secondary blast doors, which immediately slammed shut behind them, sealing the breach. Silence fell over the upper corridor, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the survivors. Nicholas lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling. His hands were bleeding, his undershirt was torn, and his muscles burned with a fiery lactic acid ache that he hadn't felt since his days hauling gear in the Mojave. Slowly, Gideon crawled over to him. The massive alien, twice Nicholas's width, looked down at the human with an expression of profound, unadulterated reverence. He extended a massive hand. Nicholas took it, and Gideon pulled him to his feet. Commander Dallas Rexford slowly picked himself up from the floor. He looked at the sealed bulkhead, then at the bruised, bleeding human who had just torn a bank vault door off its hinges with his bare hands. "You." Rexford coughed, his pride entirely stripped away, replaced by a deep military respect. "You broke my training floor, Garrison." Nicholas managed a tired, crooked smile. "You told me to find my footing, Commander. I guess I just had to dig a little deep to find it." Rexford nodded slowly. He tapped his comms unit, opening a direct channel to Admiral Kalin and the Vanguard High Command. "Admiral," Rexford said, his voice echoing clearly for all the recruits to hear, "cancel the diplomatic inquiry. The human is not a biological anomaly. He is a Vanguard." He paused, looking at Nicholas's bleeding, calloused hands. "And I recommend we immediately update our strategic doctrines. When the heavy planetary drops begin, we send the humans first." From that day forward, the galactic community stopped referring to Earth as a soft, class, two-garden world. The updated Coalition database contained a new classification, one that made even the most hardened mercenary factions in the Outer Rim hesitate before engaging. Earth was officially listed as a class, 5 Crucible World, and its people were no longer considered diplomats. They were the immovable objects of the Vanguard. If you enjoyed this deep dive into sci-fi HFY storytelling and want to explore more thrilling tales where human resilience, engineering, and raw strength take center stage in the cosmos, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss out on our upcoming galactic adventures. Your support fuels these stories. See you in the next one.
Hi, my name is Tran Trong, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, the instructor mocked Earth gravity, the human cracked his training floor, _HFY _sci-fi story. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, this story was less about showing off strength and more about discovering what someone is truly capable of when they're finally in the right environment. It was satisfying to watch assumptions get challenged, and it reminded me that real ability isn't always obvious at first glance. What was your favourite moment? When Nicholas stayed calm under impossible gravity, or when he chose to use his strength to protect others instead of proving a point? Have you ever been underestimated simply because people didn't know your background or what you could really do? One lesson I took away is to avoid judging people too quickly. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the most experience. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY stories that blend action, teamwork, and a little science fiction, feel free to like the video or subscribe for more adventures.